Hi everyone, I'm Alia and welcome back to another episode of Aligning Authenticity, where we discuss all things mental health. In today's episode, we're going to discuss a little bit more about stress. In particular, we're going to discuss what are some of the causes of stress, effects of stress, and I will share some tips as to how you can also manage stress. That term is actually thrown about a lot, right? It's like whenever you hear someone complaining, there's almost always that word stress involved. It's not always really used in a very positive way actually when you're thinking about certain conversations. When we're talking about stress, we need to define what stress actually is. And stress is essentially a state of worry or mental tension that you might be going through, our body responding to what we're viewing as certain threats or challenges. So it can actually be caused by certain difficult or challenging life events, external events. And what happens as a result of stress is where, we start having certain physical symptoms, you start having certain emotional and behavioral symptoms. Simply put, is where stress can actually affect how we think, feel, and act. Stress can also cost money because in Malaysia, there's actually studies that have shown that it actually costs the economy about 1.1 billion annually, the direct costs and the indirect costs. So a direct cost, as you might think, is like, okay, maybe you're taking certain leave days out of work, you are spending a bit more on certain medication to help manage your stress. So that's the financial direct cost of stress. But the indirect cost could come up as like loss of productivity. There could actually be a little bit more turnover, let's say if you're talking about the workplace, or even in your personal relationships. It's where you're feeling that sense of isolation, right? So all of this are still ultimately costs as a result of stress. What's also important for us to know about stress is that there are different types of stresses. You have acute stress and chronic stress. So acute stress is more short term. Like maybe you're going through a very stressful situation at that moment for maybe weeks or a few months. But when we're talking about something that's a bit more long term, it's what we would refer to as chronic stress. So maybe you have a certain health condition, or you're having to handle a certain family member or a certain job situation which is much more long lasting. So there are these differences between acute and chronic stress. And stress can actually have an effect on the body. Some of the common physical symptoms of stress are headaches, body aches, So I even had this one situation before because I was actually really stressed out in a certain job situation that, despite how much sleep I was having, and I was sure to kind of clock in the hours, but every time I woke up was where I felt that body ache, so every part of my body would be cracking or so. It was actually caused by stress. Went to the doctor, and the doctor was also sharing with me of how physically there's nothing really wrong with you. There's no organs that is not functioning correctly or whatnot. So, but what was also happening at that same time was I was not necessarily having the healthiest habits in terms of managing stress. And I think that's something which a lot of us can actually relate to, right? Because let's say a certain job situation or you're busy juggling, work and family, we don't really take that time to actually consider what is the level of stress that we are currently facing, and neither do we actually apply healthier coping mechanisms to help manage that stress. An important thing to actually realize is that when you're not managing stress for a very long period of time, it can cause other more severe problems, right? Stress doesn't directly cause anxiety or depression, but if you're having stress for a very long period of time and it's not really managed in that sense, it does set the stage for all of those things to happen. Because what happens when you are stressed is that it triggers certain hormones within your body. You hear about adrenaline, you hear about cortisol. So because of that, that is actually what can help lead to these more severe issues like anxiety and depression, or even certain physical issues. You might find that your immune system is also a bit more compromised, like you are falling sick maybe a bit more often. Think about certain friends of yours or family members even, where you see that they are very stressed out about a job. And you will notice, right, it could be a higher frequency of them falling ill. and it's not normally the case when you are less stressed. So that's just an example of how stress can lead to these different physical symptoms for someone, and it affects our quality of life. So when we talk about what are the common causes of stress, okay, for one is where we know that there is work-related stress, okay, especially if you have certain deadlines. Maybe you're worried about job security, which is a very big thing, right? Because change is on the rise. And you might also have increased workloads. The nature of the job market also seems to be changing. Roles are actually becoming much more hybrid, and you have one person that's doing maybe 2 or 3 different functions, and that can cause a bit more stress. And then when we're talking about personal life also, it's the quality of our relationships. Perhaps you're also having certain financial stresses or certain health concerns. This can also cause stress. These issues or certain situations that you're facing that can cause stress, but at the same time, it's like a cycle. Because you're stressed, and then it triggers the certain responses in our environment, and then our responses also just add on to the stress. So this is also why it's very important for us to have a proper handle and to really be mindful and aware of our own stress levels. Some people may really wonder about the seriousness or severity of stress, but it is actually a very real thing. So I had a friend of mine, which one day it was so surreal, okay? It's like one day he was just like conducting training for some of us, and we were attending this training. And then like a month or 2 later was when we heard that he had passed away. We did find out that he was stressed, and what that caused is like, so stress, right, it can kind of like come in, and because let's say for him it's like maybe he had already like certain heart issues or so. But when stress comes along, then that can be like an extra catalyst for some of these things to happen. So not to scare you, but it's where it was surreal, right? Because he looked otherwise super healthy. But what we learned was that he was not having enough sleep, and he was really stressed out about money or so. And before you know it, it's like when we feel that, okay, we always have the next day to deal with something, and then suddenly one day it's like, it doesn't always happen that way. When do you actually take action on stress? So what I normally share with clients or even people that I train is that you want to see and really monitor, like if your stress levels are off the charts and you're feeling that certain changes, like significant changes, right? Like, so maybe for example, before you used to always like eating, and then later on it's like you have a total loss of appetite, and that has kind of gone on for more than 2 weeks, then that is also a signal that you might want to try and check out like how is your stress levels, or talk to a healthcare professional. The golden rule is if you're experiencing even sleep patterns changing, appetite patterns, or for some people it's where they get really down and depressed and it goes on for longer than about 2 weeks, then that is the right time for you to actually reach out to a healthcare professional. And there's nothing wrong with really seeking out that support. I think why a lot of people don't do it, let's say in Malaysia, one is because they feel like, okay, I just keep on going, right? I'll just keep on contributing to the situation. Like, you, instead of just taking a pause and like reflecting or resting, it's like, I don't know if it's part of our culture, but it's where they think that, okay, I double down on my efforts. I'll put even more effort into this so that, eventually this stress will go away. Also, there's that element of people preferring to distract themselves, like, so whether that's like spending a lot of time on social media or procrastinating to the last minute in terms of handling certain things, because you're just like, do I really want to deal with it now? Maybe it's not really needed, right? So how do we become more aware or really determine our stress levels, right? Whether it's good stress or bad stress. One of the ways that we can actually do this is to really self-reflect. So that involves really tuning into how your body's feeling, how your emotions are, or perhaps you're noticing like certain thoughts are just traveling a lot faster in your mind, like it's just racing nonstop, right? So obviously you can see Tommy here, he is totally not stressed. That's my cat. But yeah, so you will see a bit of a difference in that sense. There are also certain tools out there that you can actually use to assess your level of stress. One is called the Depression Anxiety Stress Scales, and that is actually a tool. It's called DASS 21, DASS 21. There's a longer version, but the shorter version, which has just 21 question items, that's actually used to really detect whether you're under quite a bit of psychological distress, and if you are, and how severe your symptoms are, basically. So it will also ask you, okay, like what is the frequency of you feeling certain things. So it's a free tool, and you might find that sometimes even when you are signed on to some mental health apps or so, that this is an option that they might actually provide there for you. So let's say you do the DASS 21. So what do you actually do with the results? One is that when you see, okay, wow, I've got like this very high levels of stress, a good thing to actually do is reach out to a possible maybe counselor or a clinical psychologist. I think that one of the things that people tend to do also when they're feeling that when they're feeling a lot of differences in terms of how they're maybe behaving, acting or feeling, is to go straight to a certain psychiatrist and go get meds, you know. But I just want to put it out there that while it's also useful to have meds, you know, sometimes for some people, especially if you are a bit more financially constrained or you want to explore other methods before you want to go straight to meds, then it's also a good option for you to explore with a possible counselor / clinical psychologist. So the clinical psychologist will be able to actually help diagnose and also provide a little bit of therapy, whereas the counselor will also help you through therapy. What tends to happen in therapy is where you start to actually really explore what are the different things that are going wrong, maybe, or where some of that stress coming from. It can be very helpful for you to pinpoint a bit more of, I never really realized that this situation was causing me that much stress. Another way that we can actually assess our stress level sometimes is to ask those who are closest to us. Like, so you can actually seek that feedback from them. Like, are there significant changes in the way that I might be behaving also? Have you noticed things? And sometimes you'll be surprised by what you hear, right? I didn't even really notice the level of stress that I was under when I've changed jobs from much more stressful job to one that was less stressful. It was very interesting to see that actually my husband was like, hey, you know, you're looking so much better. Like, you look like you're feeling a lot better, a lot happier in life. So when we're talking about stress levels, that's where a lot of people, as I've mentioned just now, is where we term it as very negative. I think that, even a little bit of stress also is no good. Why are you having this stress? But in reality, actually, is where you have a good amount of stress and you also have a bad amount of stress, a bad level of stress. Eustress versus distress. So with eustress, that's actually an optimum level of stress, and studies have shown that you do need a certain level of stress when it comes to actually increasing performance. Because imagine, let's say you had no stress at all, more relaxed, right? And then you don't really feel like you need to do anything. And that's not really going to help you challenge or grow. Now, when let's say it's completely skyrocketed and it's bringing in more bad than it is good, and perhaps there are also some bits which, you know, it starts to cause all of these physical effects or emotional effects or behavioral effects, then that is when you want to call it a state of distress. Having said that, also, you know, practically speaking, it's not always possible for us to control certain stresses, right? What I mean by that is that there are certain stresses which, okay, we can maybe do something about, but there are also certain things which we may not be able to do that much about. The first thing that you can do is actually assess your level of stresses. Identify, okay, which one is the eustress, the positive amount of positive level of stress, which one is the distress, which one's really causing me a big pain right here. And then you want to break it down further to, okay, so now when I'm looking at these stresses, is it controllable or is it uncontrollable? How much of it can I really do something about? If, like, you love your job, but at the same time, it's like there are certain colleagues or maybe a certain superior who you can't really control, right? That there's going to be a certain level of stress that's coming to you. Let's say we're talking about something which is more controllable within our means. Maybe that has to do with, okay, a certain commute that you're taking to work. So maybe you have the option of deciding, okay, I want to take a different mode of transportation. I want to leave earlier. I want to leave later to make it less stressful. It can actually be a bit more controllable. I think we sometimes sometimes also tell ourselves like, oh, it's okay, I can always do something about it the next day, or maybe after this deadline, after I'm done with this next challenge or so. So I have this one friend, she really wanted to finish her studies in a shorter amount of time, and she really pushed hard, right, and continued. So she had that stress that was much more intense for that short period of time, and she thought, okay, so she got what she wanted, right, in terms of her goals, like she got to graduate at the time that she wanted. But it was so interesting that when I checked in with her a couple of months after we graduated, she told me, she's like, Alia, I just went through this autoimmune condition, because the doctor said that as a result of the stress being there for so long, it started to impact the immune system or so, and it caused this thing. So she had to spend extra money, extra time in terms of recovering from that. Sometimes it's not necessarily always where the end justifies the mean. You still want to make sure that you're having certain things in place that you're able to progress, right, at a time or a pace that works better for you. When we talk about stress and we're talking about what is controllable versus uncontrollable, there are different approaches that you can take with it. So what do we do actually when it comes to certain uncontrollable stresses that we might be facing? It is causing you a lot of distress, and it is also not within your control to do much to manage that source of stress. What you can do is what they call emotion-focused approaches. Things like exercise or journaling or even meditation or so. Physical exercise has been shown to help counter the effects of stress. It can help be a protective mechanism against anxiety and depression. The breathing techniques, they are actually referring to certain techniques that put us a little bit more in touch with our emotions and really teach us, okay, how do we manage these emotions? How do we regulate it when it gets too high or so? And also even maybe altering certain behavior thought patterns about it. The better able you are to recognize certain emotions and you're able to regulate those emotions. Studies have also shown that people with higher emotional intelligence, they are less likely to be negatively impacted by stress. So they are also less likely to be beaten by burnout and depression. And then when we're talking about controllable stresses, so the ones that you can actually do something about, that is where you might want to adopt more of what they call the problem focused approach. That's where there will be certain skills involved, like problem solving, decision making. Maybe you have to check for certain informations, or you have certain goals that you want to move towards, so that you know that, okay, this stress, it is within my control and it does not necessarily have to be long term. I can actually do certain things to help lessen it, lessen the discomfort that the stress that might be bringing me. So I would really encourage you to really reflect on your own stress levels, the symptoms, and what are some of the approaches that you're actually doing. Another one that we can actually talk about also is social support, because one important thing for us to recognize also is that when we are stressed, we might feel like we want to withdraw from everyone. We don't really want to be around other people, perhaps because handling stress itself takes a lot of energy. So it can feel like a chore, or you feel like, oh, I'm not really into having to put in more energy to a certain situation, whether that's like family or friends or so I rather just stay by myself, like let me just be a vegetable at home. Having that element of social support, people that we can actually talk to, a safe space or so, can really help us in managing stress. So we're not really expecting them to solve our stresses for us, but they can hold space for us. And if they cannot hold space for you, then it's also okay, right? We've also talked about how you can probably go to a counselor as a possible option. I hope this episode was helpful in terms of sharing a different perspective of what stress is, the effects of stress, and also how to manage stresses. If you do find it helpful, do like, comment, and subscribe. Share with me your thoughts. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next one.